my soul starts to linger, it's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along.
Now, here is a place whose history really is the stuff of storybooks. The playground for Hiram Walker, home to a world-leading conservationist. Kingsville on the Lake, as it was once called, also had Doane the druggist on Main Street, who invented his famous kidney pills. It had Jock on the fish dock, who rang a bell to announce when a poker game was underway. And it also has the elusive Old George, if that indeed was his name, who some folks still believe wanders the hallways of the original Mariners Inn. Since its birth in 1793, the town has had a shared loyalty between the land and the water, and both continue to influence it today. So, let's turn a few pages in the story of Kingsville, Ontario, here in the southernmost point in Canada.
When you speak of Kingsville, it's not as simple as just referring to a town. For Kingsville is multifaceted. First, there is the lake. Since first settlement, it has continued to affect everyday life here. It not only has created an industry, but Lake Erie has also been the link to neighboring Pelee Island and to the communities on the American shore to the south. Fishing continues to prosper, and some of it has changed with the times. Marvin Loop, Ed Snively, and Doug Murray know. They were there in the early days.
Well, as far back as I can recall is when I was with my father. We were pound netting. And we'd fish 9 pound nets. And it became quite a problem. The reason why we had to go to trap nets is because it became a problem to get the poles. We had to go to Sturgeon Falls to buy the poles. Another problem was to have the area to spread your nets out on. You had to tar them and then dry them. Well, the property was being taken up by housing. So then the government allowed us to go trap netting. So we went over to the States and we bought a beautiful trap net boat from the Ohio fisherman over there, Mr. George Franks. And we brought her over to Canada and found out how they trap netted, bought some of their nets, and we also built our own. The main catch was whitefish. We were well known for the high producers of whitefish spawn. And at that time, we fished 6 pound nets, which was $50 a net. And they paid us 40 cents a quart for the fur legs. And the government sent us a check for $300. We'd turn around and mail it back for the license for the 6 nets.
This is mostly for perch. Sometimes a pickerel will get wrapped up in there. He'll tear it. Or a bad storm will tear it. Never-ending job.
We had wooden vessels and iron men. But the weather conditions would be such that many times we would lay in. Everybody'd be down early in the morning and no one would toss their lines off. Finally, it was determined that, well, it's blowing so hard we just simply won't go on the lake. And we had all up and down this dock, the old shanties. About 9 o'clock in the morning, you'd hear one of the windows being opened, and Stan Little would grab this bell, hang it out the window and toss it and ring it, which meant that the card table was ready, which was 2 fish boxes like the boxes you're sitting upon there, an old deck of cards that the corners were turned up, and I'm sure they were marked. I think everybody that was playing the game of poker had his own markings on that deck of cards. Now there were a group of us that didn't play poker. So what we would do, we would call up the local bootleg. His first name was Marsh. And one of the boys that worked for me, whose name was Jock, and he'd call up Marsh and he said, "Marsh, this is Jock on the dock. Send down a crock."
Kingsville is its main street, its houses, where the Victorian influence is much in evidence. It was here that local druggist James Doane came up with his wonder remedy for kidney complaints, calling it, what else? Doane's kidney pills. This is the former residence of Colonel Jason King, from whom the town adopted its name. As part of Gosfield Township South, family ties go back to the Loyalists, who originally settled this district. They liked the protection offered by nearby Fort Malden at Amherstburg. No doubt they were also impressed with the idea that one could live at the same latitude as Barcelona, Spain, and Northern California, and still be in Canada. Today's residents continue to appreciate the area.
We moved here 24 years ago with our children, and we moved from South Windsor. It was the best thing we ever did, really. Just a great way of life.
With the lake's influence on the region's climate, the produce from the land is abundant. In town is the Pelee Island Winery, and I spoke with Walter Schmorantz. We don't think of this Pelee area, this Point Pelee area, Kingsville and Leamington and so on, as a grape-growing and winemaking area.
Actually, it's wrong. If you look back in history, the whole area, especially Pelee Island, there's no doubt, they had grape growing since the early 1850s, 1860s on Pelee Island. And at their peaks, they had about 4 existing wineries on the island. And they supplied wine for the market here in London, in Toronto, but mainly, to be honest, mainly to the American side, to Cleveland, to Detroit, to the large cities over there. And the major point why they don't have it anymore certainly is prohibition.
You're making wine from the grapes you grow yourself?
Entirely.
Entirely.
We're self-sufficient, yeah, if you want to say it this way.
What do you make?
We make varieties like Riesling, like Chardonnay. We also have house wines like Vinvilla, named after the first winery on Pelee Island. And unique wines like ice wine, for example, or sweeter
ice
wines
wine?
like a Scheurebe Select Harvest. Ice wine, yeah, that is something quite feasible for Canada with the climate we have. It's easier, but far easier to do here than it is in Germany, for example, because we get an early frost around early December. That's what you need. You leave the grapes as long as December on the wines. Then you pick them in frozen condition and try to squeeze them. And because of the different freezing point of sugar and water, so you get only the sweetness out of the grapes. And that makes wines with an unbelievable high concentration of sugars and extracts and acidities. Really unique, and even if it is a sweet wine, a nice balanced wine.
Bordering the community are the productive farms in this breadbasket of Ontario. On the land are people who carry the names of the eclectic mix of early pioneers. From a survey of 1800 are listed Philip Fuchs, nonpartisan from Pennsylvania; James Gertie, interpreter, Indian Department; Peter Malott, the son of a Revolutionary War ensign; Leonard Scratch, Hessian mercenary; Martin Toffelmeyer, prisoner; John Weigel, indentured servant. Kingsville is its history. This is a book called Kingsville Through the Years, and it opens with a quote from Thomas Moore. "Fond memory brings the light of other days around me."
It was published locally in 1952, and it's about the early days of Kingsville. At about the same time as this was published, a young man who spent his impressionable boyhood days growing up here was about to move away to seek his fortune. Today, he is an author and a professor of history at the University of Toronto. Michael Bliss contributes for us his chapter of Kingsville through the years.
My father came to Kingsville to practice medicine in, I think, 1937. His offices were part of our big house on Main Street, and so my early memories are very much tied up with my father's work as a doctor. You'd hear crying from the offices, and Dad would have delivered another baby. I still remember that in the late 1940s there would be people who would pay him in kind, so that occasionally we'd get a rooster, a live rooster, in payment, or a lot of good farm produce. In the late 1940s, the farmers still all came into town on Saturday nights, and the town would be full of Model Ts as the farm people came in, and the stores would stay open late Saturday nights for Saturday shopping. The other thing I remember from a very early ages is the lake, and my mother would take us down swimming, and we all swam at the Pole Dock. So to go swimming, you'd sort of wend your way through the piles of coal out to the pier, and then enjoy the coal dock. And the mark of when you were making it as a swimmer is whether you could swim across the harbor. I grew up spending my Saturday afternoons at the Roxy Theater in town, double bill with cartoons for 12 cents and 5 cents for a box of popcorn. Kingsville, before my time, certainly was a great resort town. I do remember vividly a few years when they did revive the summer dances under the stars at the Lakeshore Terrace, and you did have a wonderful sense of being in Canada's most southerly town with such a wonderful climate. I'll never forget how hot it could be in Kingsville on a summer night. Our summer nights sometimes seemed to be right out of Alabama. You always had a sense on those nights, it's the same sense you get in movies of perceptions being sharper. And living on Main Street, my memories of summer nights in Kingsville are of the crash of 10 pins in the bowling alley across the street, and also the noise when the hotel would get out about midnight, and lots of people who'd had lots of drink would pour out onto Main Street.
It was in keeping with the era of grand resorts that Hiram Walker, of distilling fame, chose Kingsville as the site to build his unprecedented Metawas Hotel. The luxury resort, although short-lived, proved to be a boom for the town. The era of tall ships and seafaring stories, though, belonged to the neighboring Grovedale House, the hangout for men of the lakes. Unusual to the place, however, was an unseen occupant. Louise Pierce and her husband were one-time owners, and she told me a very scary story. You had moved into the place, you were living upstairs,
But what's the story about when you were decorating?
That was, as we started to make a little money in the restaurant business, then we thought, well, we'd start, furnishing the rooms upstairs. And we did one room, and we painted and papered, and I put up curtains, and it was such a pretty old room. And a couple of days later, I went to check to see if, to sort of glued over it, and it was absolutely destroyed. The curtains were torn off the windows, the mattress was thrown across the room. Yeah. And we had always trouble with that one bathroom that was opposite that room. We couldn't leave anything in that bathroom. Like if you put your toothpaste in, why, it would be all squeezed out of the tube. So the big Bruce, our big lab, he always laid with his head pointing down that hall. And I didn't realize that when he started to growl, that something bad was happening. And I quick grabbed him and shot into my bedroom and left all the lights on that night, because that was the only time I ever felt threatened.
Well,
Other times it was just silly things, like misplaced tools.
I don't know. I did some refrigeration. I did all the refrigeration at that time. And I'd have my tools all set up in the last job I was working on. And I'd go home, or quitting time, and go home, and the next morning they'd be all over the place. Well, his wife Louise was in the kitchen cooking, and I'd keep hollering about this. And she come out of the kitchen this one morning and said, I won't repeat what she said, but nobody's touched your tools.
And Marv was blaming customers. He said, what the devil are you in my tools for? But we had a lot of little things like that here.
Now, let's go back and clarify something for me. The ghost is now known as George, but you told me that it wasn't George at all, it was Bill Sills. How did this George come about, and who's Bill Sills?
Bill had been the watchman for the liquor when they had it at the Grovedale. And they had some rough times. There had been a shooting there. Bill Sills had one leg. He had a peg leg. And I had never seen the man. This is long before I ever came here. But I've had different old-timers say that Bill Sills would be the one that would be haunting.
Did it sound like...
No, it was just like that.
And you actually heard that?
Oh, we heard it every night.
And Kingsville is its... Well, I believe her. The big Lakers still drop anchor in the shelter of Pigeon Bay whenever the storm warnings are out. This refuge has been used for years by the mariners of the Great Lakes. The bay gets its name from the huge flocks of passenger pigeons that used to fly over. So many of them that they'd blacken the sky and break the branches of the trees by the sheer weight of their numbers. That was in the 1850s. Well, then the commercial hunters began killing the pigeons by the thousands, even netting them in the trees. And on top of that, disease struck them, and by the turn of the century, the passenger pigeon was no more. It was extinct. Maybe the lesson in this story influenced a young local boy who later became known to just about everybody in town as Uncle Jack.
My father was Jack Miner's doctor, and I remember as a very small child being bounced on Uncle Jack's knee in the doctor's office. And I then knew some of the next generation of miners. We were always very proud of the miner sanctuary, and we were all, you know, you'd go out there on your bike and enjoy it, and it was the institution that put Kingsville very much on the map.
3 years after his death, Canada continues to honor famed naturalist Jack Miner. The father of conservation won immortality by luring thousands of Canada geese to his home, creating the first sanctuary where birds could be safe from the hunter's gun. Jack developed a bird banding system, allowing him to trace the migratory routes of Canada geese across North America. The simple address, Jack Miner, Kingsville, Ontario, stamped on each bird tag, became one of the most famous on the continent.
What could be nicer? What could be nicer? That's the only one regret I have, that I can't fly. Yeah. I often refer to this pond as the children's area or pond.
At the Jack Miner Sanctuary today are his son Jasper and grandson Kirk, who carry on the work of the organization.
We tagged over 1,600 geese last fall, and we're up in the 89,000, so we'll go over 90,000 this year, and over 78,000 ducks since 1909.
So they come in here, they land because of the food that's in the pond, then the net is tripped, traps them, you tag them, then away they go.
And release them. A lot of the students from the Jack Miner Public School a mile down the road, part of their science project, they help us. Their teacher is nice enough to give them a couple hours off in the morning when we make a catch, and we start at 9, we're normally done by 11 and 12 at the latest. We've kept it with no admission fees, according to Jack Miner's wishes, no admission fees and nothing, no commercialism. And we've somehow managed to since the turn of the century to keep going. All the geese leave here by the 15th of April, and they normally start to return. My Uncle Manley used to say on his birthday, September the 8th. But we'll have a good show all October and November here. We don't encourage anybody to come from a distance much before the 15th of October. If they're when the color's peaking in late October, but late October and November we'll have the most geese here.
Jack Miner and the birds. Just one more of the stories of Kingsville, Ontario. The town, the land, the lake, its people.
I hope we never lose our identity. I love Canada, I really do. And even though I was a Yankee, I'm a DP, delayed pilgrim, I really love the town. It's a nice little town.
The two strongest influences that growing up in Kingsville had on me were, one, making me conscious that the United States was right next door and not to be anti-American, but it gave me a more international outlook. The other thing, growing up in a small town in the 1950s, I think made you sort of more democratic or more egalitarian. You were going to school with everybody. You were going to very good community schools. You had a sense of being part of a community, of knowing everybody in the community, from the minister to the local fishermen and to some of the very poor farmers.
Whenever I go, wherever I to that place, I know it'll always be home, home to